Cafe Networking Podcast promotes successful business experts. I'm Tom Ria, connecting people throughout the world from my podcast studio in Brazil. Joining us today from Spring Lake, North Carolina, Alesia Galati, founder at Galati Media, podcast strategist and producer, and podcast host at Listeners to Leads podcast. Alesia, what makes a quality podcast?
Well, when you look at those top ranking podcasts, those top 100, top 250 podcasts, there's a few things that you'll see. Some are great, some are not, but really what's going to get you seen and heard is going to be a quality podcast. And so you'll see some of those tend to have guests on their shows. So an interview style is great. If you're a business owner, I highly recommend that you also have solo episodes so that you can share your expertise and show up as an expert in your field. It's also great for SEO. And then the second thing that we see is that the audio quality is good, yes, but even further than that, the content is good. These people are so crystal clear on who their audience is, and they talk specifically to that person. And I love that about you, Tom, because before we got started, you talked about all of that stuff about who that audience is, where the direction of the show is going. And I think that allows you to really have a quality podcast. You're not going to veer off of that. And so I usually tell people the best way to do that is to come up with some content buckets that you are going to be talking about from your show. So for my podcast, Listeners to Leads, I'm talking about podcast marketing, podcast production, podcast strategy, podcast launching, things like that. But it's important that I keep within those buckets. Yes, I can share little side stories, but I'm not going to share stories that don't add value. And some of those stories might actually need to be taken out because they don't add value.
But too, and as you portray it, as you're saying it, we need to show authenticity because there's just so much fake out there. So I think one of the advantages of podcasting, and from a listener standpoint, the listeners become not listeners, they don't become followers, they become believers more than followers. So if they believe, and they'll believe if you're authentic and your message, your content, first of all, is believable.
And that you're excited about it, right? I don't know if you've ever listened to a podcast where you get to a point where you can tell the host is no longer excited about that topic. And it's in their voice, it's in how they talk about it. And at that point, you really, as a host, have to address, is this something I should keep doing? How can I reinvigorate this excitement to continue to create a quality podcast? And not everybody does that because they think, oh, I got to keep going. When really we're humans. Sometimes we got to shift.
Well, I agree with you, but I think as in anything, any product that we can develop and do, the repeatability comes from doing it several times. And we all learn from failure. Because I've learned what attracts, and I've learned things which don't attract. But it's doing it over and over, as you mentioned before, creating the process, following the process, and just constantly aligning that process. But then going out into the field and asking people, real people, of what they think. Obviously, our reach, podcasting, gives us a reach that we really don't know how far it goes. But sometimes we get feedback from unexpected places that's highly invigorating.
Yeah, it's what I like to call the podcast celebrity effect, right? When you are showing up, even as an interviewer or as a solo podcaster, you're able to show up in a way that you are with someone while they're going about their normal daily tasks. And so that creates kind of connections of your voice and your message with those daily tasks. Most podcast listeners will actually shift their schedule around based on a podcast release. So don't change your release date, please. But I always tell people that don't do that. So they will actually say, okay, this episode goes live Monday morning. I'm going to spend my Monday morning with this person. This episode goes live on Thursday. I'm going to spend my Thursday afternoon walking the dog with this person. So you're creating these connections with them in their daily life where you're not really getting that feedback always, but you are feeding into them in their lives. And so when they get to meet you, it almost turns into what I call this fangirl kind
Right.
of moment of, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's you. And really, there's just a person behind a microphone, but it creates this really, really cool interaction, I think. So there's a lot of power in podcasting.
There's more power than most people imagine. And I say, I've written a book and I have many people, many of our guests are authors. But I said, there's nothing like a podcast. And in today's world, people want to hear, they want to listen. I'm saying they don't want to read. There's still value in books. But it's the touchy, huggy feeling that we say here in Brazil, that, and they're reaching out to voices. Not necessarily they want to see. My podcasts are all audio. They want to hear. If you have a soothing voice or any type of voice that they can latch onto and identify, as you said, if you can coin your voice, I think there's a lot of value in that.
And it'll help you stand out in an AI world, right? As we shift into a lot of this AI content. It's really important.
Very good. Well, we've been shifted into it without even asking.
Yes.
And so what I said, we do generate voice searchable content, and that's what it is. And it's been that way for years, where most people don't realize that.
Yeah. Agreed.
So, very good. So Alesia, how can our listeners find you?
Yes, I would love it. If you are listening to this podcast, you can head on over in your podcast player to listen to Listeners to Leads, or go to listenerstoleads.com. That will send you to all of my stuff. Keep it super simple.
Very good. So thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Tom.
And for our audience, Alesia Galati, it's Alesia, the last name Galati. You can also find her on her site, galatimedia.com, and her podcast, listenerstoleads.com. Cafe Networking is brought to us by Focus MI Market Intelligence, an agricultural market research specialist in Brazil. More information at focusmi.com. Talk to Tom, talk to the world. Thanks for listening. Till the next time here at Cafe and Networking Podcast.